So, can you talk to me a little bit about how these conversations go? Like, what are some of the common challenges that birth moms are facing? Let's start with before adoption. Like, what are some of those common themes?
My goal is to always just provide honest insight on the adoption process and what open adoption is and what it can be. All the things that we kind of discussed of what an expectant mom should know going into
Okay.
this. So not skirting around the fact that this is traumatic. This is going to be really hard for you, and it might not hit you now, but it might hit you later. And so, what are the different ways that grief could manifest for you, too? Discussing that. For me, I'm not the crier, and you're not going to find me in a corner curled up in the fetal position. So, my grief manifested very differently, and I didn't recognize that it was grief for many years. And so, just kind of paying attention to certain things like that. If I can tell a mom is maybe similar to me in that way, coming up with even a grief plan, identifying people in their life that could be a support system for them as they move forward. I by no means ever tell parents what to do. I want to make that very, very clear. It is strictly so that they can make an informed decision in case they are not getting that level of education from who they're working with. There were a lot of things that I wish that I had known and had been discussed with me throughout my process. And while I received, I would say, pretty good education for that time and a lot of support, it still wasn't enough. And so we've got to be really thorough, and we've got to be really real with expectant parents so that they can, again, make an informed decision and make the decision that's best for them and their child, and not hear it from the adoption agency that they're working with. If we hear it from someone who's actually kind of gone through it, it's just really helpful and can kind of sympathize and also offer resources and figure out if this is really what they want to do. And, if there's any hesitancy, try to point them in the right direction, get them connected to the right resources to parent, and really sit down with them to weigh their options while allowing them to make that decision on their own.
Welcome to the Adoption Roadmap Podcast, your go-to guide through the beautiful, complex, and transformative journey of adoption. I'm Rebecca Gruenspan, a single mom through adoption consultant for over a decade, author of the Adoption Roadmap book, and your trusted guide. In each episode, we dive into real experiences, expert insights, and the raw, honest truths that you will need to navigate your journey. Whether you're just beginning, in the thick of it, or well past placement, you'll find support and community here to help you navigate this unique path with confidence and love. Adoption isn't all rainbows and butterflies. It is life-changing and worth every bit of effort. Let's learn, grow, and journey together on the Adoption Roadmap Podcast. Welcome to the Adoption Roadmap Podcast. Today, we're honored to welcome Jessie Mattos, a dedicated birth mother, passionate advocate, and the director of birth mother programs at Abiding Love Charities. Hailing from Orlando, Florida, Jessie has transformed her deeply personal adoption journey into a mission to support and empower all sides of the adoption triad. Known on Instagram as @ItTakesATriad, Jessie reminds us that you can't have an adoption with one side missing, so we can't heal or support one another without considering how each side is impacted by adoption. She candidly describes adoption as weird and awkward, embracing the complexity and vulnerability that comes with it. Let's dive into this conversation with Jessie as we explore the deep, sometimes unspoken truths about adoption and uncover how better communication and support can empower every member of the adoption triad. Jessie, thank you so much for being here. Who is a birth mother? We're going to start there.
Great question. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for having me on here. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. But a birth mother, I mean, she's your next door neighbor. She's your daughter's best friend who she met in 7th grade science class. She's the girl sitting next to you at your favorite local restaurant, and she's the woman who wakes up every day to take care of your children at daycare. She's your child's favorite teacher. She's a daughter, she's a sister, and she's often a mother already. She's a birth mother is a woman who has found herself in a near impossible situation and has very limited time to figure out what the right option is going to be, and may never know if the decision she chooses is the right option.
Yeah. What do you wish every expectant birth mother, expectant mom, knew before they started the adoption process?
This is a loaded question. I feel like we could spend a lot of podcasts discussing just this question alone. Yeah. But if we look at informed consent, it's important that they understand the risks that are involved in adoption regarding how the relationship could change. There's the risk with the adoptive parents cutting contact or not following through on their promises. They need to understand how this is going to impact their child for the rest of their life and how it's going to impact them as well. I think a lot of agencies and adoption professionals are too nervous to be frank and honest with expectant parents because they don't want to overwhelm a mother who is already in crisis. And while I get that, this is a very complex and heavy decision that changes and impacts generations to come. And so we've got to be having these discussions. We can't be afraid to give them the hard facts about adoption. And I think for me personally, understanding some of these more complex themes in adoption has helped my healing journey because it's helped me connect the dots, and it's allowed me to have a little bit more control over my own healing journey and over my adoption. And while yes, you don't want to overwhelm them, it's only going to help them in the future as they navigate their pregnancy, but also as they navigate their relationship with the adoptive parents and with the child. They also need to understand their rights. So for example, PACAs, I know not all states have them, but they're hard to enforce. And so they need to understand that, well, yes, you might have a PACA. What does that really look like? And how should it be handled? Should the adoptive parents violate the agreement? And what are the chances of you even being able to do anything about it, even if you have a legally binding contract? And same with birth parent expenses as well. Make sure you understand what that looks like and what that means based on your state laws. In addition to the risks and their rights, they also need to understand what their responsibility is. You know, this is a relationship. And as we get away from close adoptions, there's going to be more of a demand on what they're going to have to put into the relationship. It goes both ways. They've got to put effort into the relationship just as much as the adoptive parents need to put effort into the relationship to better support the child and help them navigate their life post-placement and into adulthood. And if they're not aware of what they need to be doing to support their child, it's going to cause the child to struggle, and it's also going to cause the birth parents to struggle as well.
Okay, I'm writing so that I don't forget some of the stuff that you just said. So let's go back to, well, first of all, I just want to, PACA stands for Post-Adoption Communication Agreement. And that is an agreement that between you and the birth mom, maybe the birth parents, but specifically the birth mom, I think, in what you are agreeing to as far as communication, visits, what is at least the minimum going to look like that you are promising to uphold. That's what that agreement is. And it's usually just on the side of the adoptive parent. Like, what is the adoptive parent promising to do as far as keeping in touch? Is that your understanding of it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that's what PACA is. Were you going to say something there?
No.
Okay. You first started off by saying something about themes that helped you move through your own experience and healing. What do you mean by themes, and can you give me an example?
So I guess I'm referring to how the adoption impacts my child. If I didn't understand the emotional and the mental toll that's going to take on them, I think I would be handling my adoption very differently. And so again, it kind of allows me to, I guess, indirectly parent them. I may not be literally parenting her, but there are things and there are choices that I can make for my own life and in my own relationship that impact her and protect her in a way. I know that in the past, I didn't have a lot of knowledge. There's no guidance. No one sat us down and said, this is what the relationship should look like. This is how this is going to affect her and everything. And as I've kind of learned more, our relationship has just gotten stronger because I have a lot more knowledge and I don't feel like I'm just aimlessly wandering through this relationship. I'm more grounded. I have just a better understanding of what this is going to do at every stage of her life or how it's going to impact every stage of her life. And so, yeah, just armored with knowledge, essentially. Knowledge is power in this case. And the more that we understand some of these themes and how adoption really even impacts the adoptive parents as well, I'm just able to handle my adoption relationship better rather than only focusing on how it impacts me. I've got to understand how it impacts everyone else.
Yeah,
The
I
good, the
love
bad,
that.
ugly, all the above.
It makes so much sense. And I feel that way too from being on a different uh, line of the triad. Um, how did you learn this stuff?
Well, I spent the first, I don't know, maybe 7 years of my adoption avoiding the adoption industry or adoption community.
And is that what you
I
mean by you might have done it differently? I was thinking to myself, does that mean she would maybe just kind of run away and ignore it and try to get on with her life?
Potentially, I think I
Okay.
I see a lot of parents who will kind of hold on to their grief as well. They think
Mm-hmm.
they kind of wait for a reunion or to meet their child again for them to process their grief. And as if you hold on to this love, like that's their sign, or if you hold on to the grief, that's their sign of love. And if they stop grieving, then that must mean that they don't love their child anymore. But if you don't process it, if you're not moving forward, if you're not figuring out how to process and navigate this relationship in a healthy way, it's like going to be unkinking a hose. It's all going to come out at once. You could project, you could cause damage in the relationship because you've not taken the time to really learn and process everything that you've experienced. And of course, we talk about this, how grief is ongoing in adoption. You're constantly going to be grieving the certain milestones in the relationship. And so having this knowledge and being able to identify what that grief looks like is going to help prepare you for the future.
And because and part of my question is, I'd imagine number one, there are a lot of birth moms who don't have that insight that you have. I don't know if you always had that, but what made you kind of dig in and how did you learn it?
Yeah, trial and error, I think.
Yeah.
I also have been very fortunate to have had a lot of people in my life pour into me. My pregnancy counselor in particular was a friend more than anything else. We're still friends to this day and we raise our kids together. But when I first, when I was pregnant, going to the agency, she was only a few years older than me and we really just connected. And a lot of people didn't know about my pregnancy. And so again, I just needed a friend. And that's kind of what she was to me. So she was always pestering me to get me involved and try to get me to be on panels and speak to adoptive parents about the birth parent experience. And I thought that was enough. I'm like, okay, I'm doing my part. I'm contributing. I'm in
Mm-hmm.
talk therapy, all that, stuff. But I wasn't getting involved with other birth mothers. And that's what really hung me up. I didn't want to be a birth mother. I didn't want to associate myself with other birth mothers. I had a lot of internalized stigmas of who birth mothers were. And in my mind, I was not one. And this really prevented me from connecting. And that's really what I needed. And as I went through this process, I've always had a good relationship with the adoptive family, and they've never met me with resistance, which has allowed me to kind of explore some of these themes in adoption and understand them better because I wasn't so focused on any sort of like bitterness or resentment. And so by doing that, I did have the freedom to explore some of these different avenues and opportunities because I didn't feel like I was being held back or judged by pursuing some of these things. And so again, I've had people pour into me as I kind of begin my advocacy journey and started getting plugged in more. And, those relationships are very invaluable to me. And in addition to that, I have a few close friends who are adoptees, and their relationships, their insight has been very, very key to understanding how to navigate the relationship with my daughter and her family.
I love
and I'm
this so
incredibly
much.
grateful for them. So yeah, trial and error, and just really paying attention, putting myself out there, trying to have certain conversations, because again, no one was holding our hand and doing this for us. We kind of just had to figure it out ourselves. Thankfully, we were on the same page in that way, and, just kind of had this understanding already that this was a relationship, but we've got to kind of figure this out.
Well, I love a couple things that you said here, and most of my listeners are either adoptive parents or hopeful adoptive parents. And I think some of the things that you're saying here are so important for adoptive parents to hear. Number one, how we treat the birth mothers of our children has a direct impact to their healing, which also has a direct impact to how our child is going to view their entire being, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's number one. Number two is you resisted community. And then once you got into community, you realized how much you needed it. And I want to speak to adoptive parents too, because there's so many adoptive parents who think once they have their baby in their arm, they're good. We're just like any other parent, and we can go about our way. And, and it's just the difference that I see during the journey and after of families who are willing to engage in community. I don't care if you participate or if you just watch. It makes a huge difference. You also mentioned expenses and knowing about expenses as one of the things you want expectant moms to know. What do you mean by that? And one of the things that makes this so intriguing to me is that for so long, I didn't think that birth moms, and maybe they still don't, expectant moms, understood the fact that the family that they choose to match with are the ones paying the expenses. So you might have met something different, but I think those two things are really fascinating to me.
Yeah, I think that's important to understand as well. But we see a lot of professionals will tell mothers, well, if you change your mind, you are going to have to pay us back. And that's not true. It's a charitable gift. And so I think that is oftentimes used as a coercive tactic. And so understanding exactly what your rights are when it comes to birth parent expenses, and hearing that from the agencies so that you know where they stand on that, so they don't try to pull that on you. But yeah, just understanding what those birth parent expenses they mean, and what that looks like to the agency and what they expect from that.
Yeah. Now, unless you are a known scammer who is doing something against the law, that is different.
Yes.
And I think you'd agree, right? Okay. Yes. And then you also said something about the birth mom's responsibilities as well, knowing what their responsibility in this is. And it was specifically having to do, you were talking about the PACA, and then you said something about the birth mom's responsibilities. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, we're parents, we're mothers. And while we might not be parenting our child, we're always going to be a mother figure in their life. And we have to kind of act accordingly. And I think that gets missed a lot. But we have a responsibility to this child. If we're bringing this child into this world and we're making the decision to place them for adoption, we need to kind of own up to maybe our mistakes and the decisions that we've made. And, there's aspects of everyone's adoption that they can probably look back on and go, oh, I wish I hadn't done it, or I wish I had done that differently. And, forgiveness goes a long way, not just forgiving yourself, but forgiving other people, because there's no rule book for this. There's no guidebook. Every adoption is going to be different. And so to expect that it's going to be perfect is unrealistic, but to expect others to handle the relationship without your contribution is also unrealistic. You've got to put in equal effort. You've got to make sure that you're also picking up the phone and contacting them. I see a lot of adoptive parents, or we haven't heard from her in a while, or she didn't show up for those visits. How do you think that's going to reflect on your child? You've got to commit to your child. They need you to commit to them. And yeah, again, you're not parenting them, but you've got to show up for them the best way that you can, and make sure that you're keeping those lines of communication open. And if it is getting challenging, then you talk to the family about that. I tell adoptive families this, like, expect your relationship to change. What worked at the beginning is not going to work in 5 years or 10 years from now. And that's okay. I think it's unrealistic as well to expect it to be the same the whole time. So have conversations, revisit what this relationship looks like. Sit down with them. Maybe it's just a 5-minute phone call. Maybe it's just a few texts here and there, but saying things like, hey, we had, this year was really great. I really enjoyed our visits, or the amount of communication. I want to make sure that you're still happy with the level of communication that we have. Or is there something maybe that you need from us or don't need from us? This is, like you said, this is kind of an awkward relationship. You're taking two perfect strangers most of the time and combining them into an extremely intimate relationship without any foundation. Mm-hmm. So you've got to kind of play catch up here, which means that you have to be really intentional with the questions that you're asking and the conversations that you're having, and just be transparent and honest with one another. So showing up for your child can mean a lot of different ways, but we're still responsible for supporting this child for the rest of their life. And you've got to figure out what that's going to look like, and how you're going to work with the adoptive parents to help them grow in their confidence and understand their adoption story, and just feel more secure in their identity.
Yeah. And I do want to say that, there's a power shift, right? After you place your child. And so
Yes.
now the adoptive parent is in the power seat, right? And oftentimes a birth mother may feel like, well, I don't know if I can say this, or if I should say this, or, will they close off communication altogether if I blah, blah, blah. So just like it's important for adoptive parents to continue to bring up conversations around adoption with their child in order to let the child know it's okay to talk about, even if they don't want to, it's up to us to keep bringing it up, because otherwise they will think we don't talk about that in our family. We also have to continue, even when birth mom isn't responding or showing up. That doesn't give us an out from our promises and our agreement. And why don't we start the conversation with her saying, you didn't show up. That was hard for us. I'm navigating that with my child. Is this a hard time for you? Do you want to talk about this? Extend that olive branch. Mm-hmm. So There's responsibility on all sides, for sure. And I'm grateful that you brought that up. You often stress the importance of research when a mom chooses an agency, and this goes for anyone working with an adoption agency, right? So, but what should an expectant mom look for to ensure that they're partnering with an agency that is compassionate and has ethical practices, whatever that means for you? What do you think they should be looking for, asking?
Yeah. So I think pay attention to the type of education that they're providing the adoptive families. So ask them what that looks like. Ask them what they're requiring them. If it's just like, oh, we ought to tell them to read a couple books here and there, that's not enough. There's some agencies that don't provide any education, and you don't want to work with those agencies. You want to make sure that their families are getting thorough and comprehensive adoption education. And I know that that's going to vary, and that's a little bit subjective, but it's more than just a couple hours of, education. This is a lifelong journey. And so it needs to be substantial. Obviously understanding their rights, making sure that they're explaining that correctly and thoroughly to them, and also looking for a separate legal representation. If they don't offer that, if they don't provide that, then again, maybe find another agency that does, because you're going to want that. This is one of the most complex and emotional processes, and to do it without separate representation is risky. So if an agency is like, oh, don't worry about that, yeah, no, you probably should worry about that and maybe find another agency. And then also ask how they manage the relationship between the adoptive family and the birth family. How would they resolve conflict should it arise? Do they hold adoptive families accountable? Should they go back on their promises? What do they tell families in terms of communication after the fact? I hear from professionals all the time where they will tell the family, pull back, or, maybe she doesn't understand what adoption really looks like. So maybe you should text her less. And I'm thinking, she just had this baby, she's grieving, and you think that that's going to help? So really pay attention to how they describe open adoption and, and how they monitor that relationship.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, the education piece, because I find that it comes from different people at different times. So number one, I mean, my opinion is maybe that needs to start at the home study, right? A home study shouldn't be approved necessarily until you know the basics, right?
Right. Yes.
And I know that that's not always happened. Also, some agencies, it used to be when, and I know both of our, you have a daughter, right? Who's 13?
14.
14. Okay. And I have a son who's 13. When I started working in adoption 13 years ago, adoptions were much more abundant, and agencies typically had somebody who worked with the family, somebody who worked with the mom, somebody, they had a lot more staff. Mm-hmm. And nowadays it's usually one person who's navigating all the sides of it, right? And then there's the administration side. So more and more agencies are starting to lean on, I know I work with a ton of different agencies who will only work with families who are working with a consultant who they know mm-hmm. do a lot of education because they don't have enough time to do it, but that's important for them to do. And they say all the time, we know when a family calls us, who's working with a good consultant or who's coming into us knowing what adoption is and what it's not. And oftentimes they are a small shop and their focus is on the birth mom, which is where they should be. That doesn't mean that if they don't have time to do the education, that you don't need to go out and get it yourself. So it comes from a lot of different ways in a lot of different places now. And I think part of the follow-up question of, do you require your families to have education, or do you provide education? And if you don't provide it, do you require that of your families, and where are they getting it? Right.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like there's certainly more of a demand and some higher expectations nowadays, but there still is a lot of agencies and entities that provide the bare minimum, and you can't really do that. There's a lot of other things that they should be paying attention to. Of course, there's positive adoption language, and pay attention to how they're talking about adoption. If they're saying things like, oh, it's a selfless decision, or you're such a loving mother for considering adoption, things like that. While it might feel good to hear, that's, kind of coercive, because mm-hmm. would they be saying that you were a loving mother if you were considering parenting? So these are all the little, I guess, toxic positivity in adoption that you want to kind of pay attention to. And typically it's said with good intentions most of the time. But there are people who use that to kind of coerce women into placing, and might make them feel like they would be selfish if they decided to parent. Mm-hmm. And so just pay attention to how they're talking about adoption and how they're talking about it to the families and to you. But yeah, there's a lot of things, for me, it's kind of hard to look back, because I think I know a little bit too much now. But like you were saying, it's very easy to pick up on if a family has done their research and has a good amount of education. I mean, I can talk to someone within 15 minutes and know, like, okay, they get it. They've figured it out. So yeah, it gets very obvious when you kind of go into this and have been around for a little while of what to look for. And so I know that I might be saying some of these things and remembering where I was when I was considering adoption. And it is hard to understand and really truly know what to look for, which is why it's important as adoption professionals, we are setting a really high standard of care for these mothers and not taking advantage of the fact that they may not know what to look for.
We, every year we're trying to tweak things to make it a little bit different and easier for families. And we were noticing all of these speakers that we would bring into our community every month, and nobody was showing up at the rate that we were hoping they would. And well, the interesting part was more people who were already adoptive parents came back and listened, because I think now they are starting to get it, but that's not good enough, right? You need to know this stuff before. And so we changed it up a little and we said, okay, well, let's spoon feed them the exact videos they need to watch where they are in the process and make that okay, this is your step now and this is part of it. Go watch it. So I'm hoping more people are actually doing it now. And I think they are. I get it. It gets overwhelming. There's so much to think about. And it is so important. And I love when it comes from other mouths other than just my own, because I feel like I'm a broken record. So at Abiding Love Charities, I know that you work directly with birth moms to provide support before and after placement. So can you talk to me a little bit about how these conversations go? Like, what are some of the common challenges that birth moms are facing? Let's start with before adoption. Like, what are some of those common themes?
Sure. So we predominantly focus on post-placement care. That's what we are. But when it comes to pre-placement, most of it is just mentorship with mothers who are considering adoption, and they might find us through various ways. Maybe someone knows and reaches out to me to talk to her. But my goal is to always just provide honest insight on the adoption process and what open adoption is and what it can be. All of the things that we kind of discussed of what an expectant mom should know going into this. So not skirting around the fact that this is traumatic. This is going to be really hard for you, and it might not hit you now, but it might hit you later. And so what are the different ways that grief could manifest for you too? Discussing that. For me, I'm not the crier. You're not going to find me in a corner curled up in the fetal position. So my grief manifested very differently, and I didn't recognize that it was grief for many years. And so just kind of paying attention to certain things like that. If I can tell a mom is maybe similar to me in that way, coming up with even a grief plan, identifying people in their life that could be a support system for them as they move forward. I by no means ever tell parents what to do. I want to make that very, very clear. It is strictly so that they can make an informed decision in case they are not getting that level of education from who they're working with. There were a lot of things that I wish that I had known and had been discussed with me throughout my process. And while I received, I would say, pretty good education for that time and a lot of support, it still wasn't enough. And so we've got to be really thorough, and we've got to be really real with expectant parents so that they can, again, make an informed decision and make the decision that's best for them and their child, and not hear it from the adoption agency that they're working with. If we hear it from someone who's actually kind of gone through it, it's just really helpful and can kind of sympathize and also offer resources and figure out if this is really what they want to do. And, if there's any hesitancy, try to point them in the right direction, get them connected to the right resources to parent, and really sit down with them to weigh their options while allowing them to make that decision on their own.
What are some of the common themes post-placement that you work with moms on?
A lot of frustration within the relationship. So that's why I talk about that often. There are a lot of very disappointed birth parents that I work with. I see a lot of very unfortunate situations where adoptive parents will cut contact for minor offenses. And I wouldn't even consider them minor offenses. I would consider them normal behavior. There's one story with this mom, and the family cut contact because they were sick. And she was like, oh, I wish I could come over and help. And they were afraid that she was going to show up at their door, So these are the types of things. It's like, don't be afraid of her emotions. Don't be afraid of her grief. It's totally normal. What do you expect, And so there's a lot of birth moms who are just absolutely grieving, not only the relationship that they, like the loss of their child, but the relationship that they thought they were going to have with the adoptive parents. It's upsetting because the trust has been broken. And, adoptive parents do hold the power, and recognizing that is not a bad thing. It's important to recognize that so you don't end up abusing it, and trying to help guide these women through conflict, helping them maybe even word things well if they're struggling to voice their concerns. I have friends in my own life where we'll say, hey, does this sound okay? Relying on your community is really, really important. And I think adoptive parents need to do that as well. And we've got to be supporting everyone and supporting each other through this. So yeah, navigating through that grief, helping them figure out their relationship and what's going to work for them, getting them connected to resources if they're pursuing education or things like that, or if they want therapy, or get them connected to other community members in their area. So there's a lot of different things that we can help them with post-placement, but the biggest challenge is what that relationship looks like, and helping them work through maybe some of the bitterness and anger that can come from broken promises too, can really help them kind of take everything in stride.
Yeah, I think it's important for adoptive families to know that some themes that I've seen right after birth, mom is probably going to be texting a lot those first few days. Her hormones are out of whack. She just gave birth. She just placed her baby in somebody else's arms, and she is postpartum, right? A lot of things are going on. She is out of whack in a lot of different ways, emotionally, physically, and she needs some semblance of everything's okay. Like, what did I just do? Is my baby okay? Did I place them with the right people? At the same time, you just became a parent and you want time to nest with that baby and get to know that baby. So there is this conflict that goes on right at the beginning. And you need to know that that's going to happen, because you need to be there to answer the birth mom's texts and calls. It doesn't have to be every 5 minutes, but you need to be there to love on her in the same way you are loving on this baby, and so excited for being a parent. This person that made you a parent is grieving so hard right now that's going to happen. That will subside, usually fairly quickly, like within the first couple weeks. There's also a time where she may disappear completely after regular contact. And this may happen often throughout the relationship. And it may be because things are too hard for her and she just can't right now and she needs space. Who knows? For whatever reason. But I see that as a common theme as well. And just know that that's probably not forever either. She will pop back in when she is ready. And most likely she will. So it's important for families to know that this is going to happen. And then the third thing is, as babies have seasons in their lives, right? Like the terrible twos and the whatever you call them. And there's certain points in the relationship and in development that are much harder than others. So do all of we. All of us have those seasons as well. And birth moms are not exempt. There may be a birth mom who's an addict and they go on a binge afterwards. And you think to yourself, I cannot have my child near this person, and you shut the doors forever. Just because that is happening right now in her life, and maybe you're right, maybe while she's actively using, you don't need to do visits during that time because you promised to keep her baby safe. And if you feel like that's not safe right now, that's fine. And don't shut that door. Things change. She may become sober. Maybe you can help her and support her and tell her our door is never shut. We want to support you. There are so many seasons that we go through, and we have to know in advance and be prepared that these are seasons, and that doesn't mean that suddenly your agreement is off.
Right. Yeah. You can set boundaries in a way that still,
Setting boundaries.
yeah, honors them and the relationship. And yeah, always leave that front porch light on. Like you said, nothing is permanent really. And there's things are going to change. Things have changed my life, obviously. And yeah, it's unrealistic to expect everyone to kind of stay the same, but also recognizing the fact that when a woman is considering adoption, it's not like our lives are going great at that time.
Yeah.
And so to expect us to be unemotional or seemingly stable is unrealistic, especially if there's been crisis,
Yeah.
and multiple crises in her life. There might have been a lot of dysfunction in her own relationships, and she might not know how to have healthy communication.
Right.
And you might be the only example of healthy communication she's had. And so are you going to use that for good, or are you going to use it against her? So just kind of having a good understanding of the human condition is going to help you figure out that relationship and what's going to work best. But, patience is the name of the game in adoption. And if you are quick to cut contact or set even unrealistic boundaries, it's only going to make things worse. Meeting a mom with resistance is going to intensify that longing, is going to make them more reactive. And so when I hear professionals tell families to pull back because maybe she's texting them too much, and what is too much, that's subjective. But, it's like, why would you do that? Do you think that's really helping? No one heals in isolation. So why would you want to push this person away? This person who could be a major key to raising your child as well. Because if you understand them, if you figure out and learn more about the birth family, it's going to help you learn more about your child, because whether you like it or not, that child is a stranger in your home. They don't share any genetic traits or characteristics. And so you might have a completely different learning style from them. And as they go through grade school, you might be able to have access to the birth family and say, hey, what worked for you? Did you benefit from one-on-one tutoring, or what sports were you into? Were you creative? All of those types of things are going to really help you learn more about your child. And I think a lot of people underestimate that. And so we can't cut them off, because there's going to be different stages in your child's life that are going to require you to be students of them. And the birth parents are that's access to a lot of really great information.
Yeah. Do women often come to you after with regret?
Before we go on, I'm going to take a quick break, but don't go anywhere. We have so much more to cover.
Shopping for the right hair and skincare products can be tough, especially for multicultural or transracial families. That's exactly why Kate Shanahan created Sweet Peachtree Marketplace. When Kate and her husband adopted their daughter, she realized that caring for her melanin-rich skin and beautiful curls was essential to raising a confident girl. And as a cancer survivor herself, chemical-free ingredients were a must. She wanted one place with safe, natural products for her whole family, plus education and resources for families like hers. Now you can find it all at Sweet Peachtree Marketplace. Just visit sweetpeachtree.com, and because you're a listener of the Adoption Roadmap podcast, if you use code ROADMAP10, you'll get 10% off your first order. sweetpeachtree.com with the code ROADMAP10 for 10% off your first order. Sweet Peachtree, celebrating every curl, every shade, every family. Do women often come to you after with regret?
Yes and no. Most of the time when there is regret, it's because contact has been cut or the adoptive family has gone back on their word. Rarely do I see a situation where the relationship is going well and the mom still regrets it. You can have a lot of grief and be really sad that you had to make this decision. We see that, but regret typically is associated with how the relationship is going.
How often are the birth fathers involved?
I'm seeing it more and more.
Okay.
Not often, but I am seeing it more. Where the birth fathers are getting involved. When it comes to post placement, they definitely don't pursue it as much as birth mothers do. I think that's obviously just how men are designed a little bit differently there, and a lot of the education that we have about post placement grief and things like that is related to birth mothers. And so birth fathers do have different needs, and I just don't think that there's a lot out there that's designed for them, and so that might prevent them from reaching out and finding community. But we are seeing more birth or expectant fathers being involved in the adoption process.
Awesome. Okay, you brought up language earlier, and so I want to talk about language specifically as it has to do with the hopeful adoptive parents adoption profile or the storybook that they create, which is the one tool that's used for an expectant mom to choose who she wants to match with typically, right? Maybe there's a phone call ahead of time. So we often grapple with word choice, such as your baby versus our baby versus a baby. And there's other ones too, but let's just start with that one and what some of your thoughts are.
Yeah, so your baby versus our baby, to me, and this might be just personal, this is kind of going to be subjective as well. I think our baby is appropriate, and I think your baby is appropriate. But it also just depends on what the context is. So I see families and profiles. I've actually been editing profiles for almost 5 years now, and so I've seen many. And when it comes to like the promises of like what they're, how they're going to parent this child, I think that that's appropriate to say like, we plan to parent our child this way, because that's a little bit more general. That's not specifically talking about the baby that's in, that this mother is carrying. But when it comes to other things in the profile, I think using, your baby is a little bit more appropriate as you consider your options for you and your baby, things like that. It would be weird to say when you're considering your options for you and our baby, so it just depends on the context, of course. But, that would be kind of the difference between
What
those.
about if it was like, this is how we would raise our baby, your baby, a baby?
That's when it's going to, be a little bit more subjective. That's going to be a little personal, I think. I think it's, if you're nervous, if you're not sure, you can always just say your.
Yeah.
Just go to your baby.
And I ask because sometimes people might think your baby feels like, I don't know if I want to say coercive, but I don't know, feels a certain sort of way. I've heard it so many different ways and so many different opinions about the word choice with that one. The other one is calling a mom brave or selfless or courageous. How does that sit with you?
Yeah, just don't use them. They feel insincere, or they can feel insincere. When someone is in crisis or they're vulnerable, they're at risk for being exploited. And so a lot of times those words just fall flat and they don't hit the same way that you might think they do. Oftentimes the last thing we feel is brave. And so when someone is giving us all these flattery words, it just kind of can feel, again, a little insincere and almost like, well, I just don't feel that way. And it's a reminder of like, I actually feel very selfish, or I feel very scared. And so I think that there are better ways to encourage a mom without using these cookie cutter statements that we see and read all the time. And we just want relatable parents. We just want people who are going to be themselves in their profiles. We can pick up when it is insincere. And while you might be saying it because it's, with good intentions, it just kind of falls flat and doesn't have the same impact as you might think it does.
What is there anything else that as you're reading profiles, you're like, oh, I see this all the time, and no.
Yeah. So one of the other ones that I see, and I'm not seeing it as often, is the comparison with spiritual adoption versus earthly adoption. And so there's a lot of families.
I've never even heard that.
Yeah. So a lot of families will say, we feel led to adopt because we were all adopted. And this is obviously speaking within the Christian faith. And so that one, again, good intentions, but when you're telling an adopted child this, their association to adoption is their separation from their family. And that's painful for them. Mm-hmm. So any Christian family who is trying to, guide their child through their faith, you might think that this is helpful for them, but it actually can make them grapple with what their relationship with Christ really looks like. And they might ask questions of like, well, why me, God? Why was I chosen to be separated from my family? That kind of thing. And so, words like chosen or gift and, we're all adopted. It's like, well, maybe in the spiritual sense, but an earthly adoption is very, very different. And you were definitely not, not adopted in that way. And so it's just, they're completely opposite. And to compare the two is just don't do it. It really can make them struggle and also prevent them from processing their own adoption. And, it kind of falls in line with the same theme of like, they should be grateful. We should be grateful that we were adopted by God, right? That's kind of falls on the same line, I guess, where they might have some adverse feelings towards their adoption. But if they're comparing it to spirituality, there's going to be a lot of guilt there if they don't have such a grateful or positive outlook on their adoption. Yeah. So that is a theme that I see a lot, obviously, mostly within the Christian faith space. And then, blessing, gift. Well, yes, all children are blessings. Be careful of who you're saying it to. That word is a little bit different for adoptees than it is for biological children. I hope I explained the spiritual adoption versus earthly adoption.
You totally did. Well, I've actually never, ever heard that, which I guess is good that our families that I work with aren't using that. And also the whole dear birth mother. We shouldn't be using dear birth mother. Do you agree?
Birth mother. Yeah. Yep. She's not a birth mother until those papers are signed. Right. Dear mom. Mom works. I mean, she's a mom. So
I just say, start with hi. We are.
Yeah. Hello.
Kick out the formalities.
Yes. Yeah. It is weird when I see families do like dear expectant parent. I'm like, this just feels odd.
It does. It does. You talked a little bit about communication. We've talked a lot about communication, and mostly when we've talked about communication, it's been post-adoption, but more and more, there's been a lot of direct communication pre-adoption, like after a match. A lot of agencies now have expectant moms and hopeful adoptive parents text directly, maybe after an initial phone call with somebody from the agency on. What are your thoughts about that? And do you have any tips for effective communication? Because it's such a sensitive time. And this is a point in time where the expectant mom holds all the power, right? So it shifts a lot. And also the agency too. Right.
Right. And the agency should be monitoring these relationships and making sure that things are going smoothly and that there's, they're helping mitigate conflict or, just to solve any of those issues. But this is your time to get to know them. But don't start setting habits that you're not going to be able to keep up. Right. If you're overloading this mom with because you're checking in on her all the time, that's great. But make sure that you're being realistic about the level of communication that you're having with her, because most likely it's not going to be the same after placement. Again, you're going to be raising an infant. You're going to be exhausted. Mom's going to be dealing with her placement as well. And certainly don't ignore her by any means, but just be mindful of the habits that you're setting and if you're going to be able to keep them up. And I think a lot of adoptive parents will be a little bit overeager. That overeagerness can be a little off-putting as well. And we can sense that. Again, we're in a vulnerable position. And a lot of times when mothers are considering adoption, this isn't the only vulnerable position they've been in their life. And so they might be very used to people taking advantage of them. And so they might be even more skeptical of you if you're coming across, maybe you're coming on too strong. So just, again, having an understanding of the human condition will really benefit you in adoption, and also having very, very good communication skills too, but paying attention to that, and make sure that you're not totally overloading this mom, because we don't want her to feel bad when she gets to the hospital and she has her baby and maybe she's considering parenting. I do see this too, where families or mothers will end up placing because they've spent all this time getting to know the family and they don't want to break their hearts by parenting. And I have seen women place their children for that reason. And people might think, well, how could you do that? Like, that's ridiculous. It's like, well, when you're in crisis, like you're not thinking rationally, right? That if you understand anything about trauma on the brain, it's very hard to make rational decisions when you're in that position. And so it happens, unfortunately. So just making sure that you're reminding them that, you're here for them no matter what. Giving them that validation that no matter how much communication we have or how well we get to know one another, like ultimately this is your baby and you have the right to make whatever decision you want to make, can go a long way.
My rule of thumb is to guide parents to let mom initiate the conversation. And if she's not, then maybe once a week, just check in and just say, I'm thinking about you. I hope you're feeling well. How are you doing?
Right.
Type of thing.
Yeah. And it's important to keep in mind too, that most moms, we are very nervous. At least for me, and I know for many other moms, we already feel like such a problem. Right. And so we don't want to step on any other toes. And we are sometimes too nervous to reach out. So if you don't hear from us, like you said, it's important to maybe reach out here and there. Don't do it every day. Again, don't come on too strong, but be sensitive to the situation, be sensitive to the fact that, maybe she feels weird texting you and reaching out to you first. Right. And you're going to figure that out along the way, but it is really going to take a lot of intentional communication to figure out what that's going to look like for you guys. But both sides can be a little hesitant to reach out. Again, this is a really awkward,
it's weird and awkward
relationship, and you just have to accept the fact that it is weird and awkward, and it might be weird and awkward for a while as you get to know one another. Everyone paints this picture of adoption is going to be really beautiful and everything's going to be, perfect because we've wanted this baby for a really long time, and then they bring the baby home and it's a completely different story. And sometimes I think that they're a little embarrassed to admit that they're struggling or that the relationship doesn't look like what they thought it was going to look like. And that's why you need that community. That's why post-placement support is almost more important than, anything you receive pre-placement, because that's the rest of your life. That's the rest of your child's life. And so, leaning in and finding other adoptive parents that you can rely on will be really helpful for your journey. Just like if you're parenting biological children, you've got to find mom groups. You've, got to get plugged in, and just having other people that you can lament to and just be like, oh yeah, I've been there. I get it. That sometimes is all you need.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of weird and awkward, I encourage families, when you have that first phone call, if you're feeling weird and awkward, call it out. Just be like, this feels so weird and awkward and also super exciting. We're excited to talk to you. I mean, let her know that you're also excited. But I think it just breaks the ice, and she can feel like, oh, okay, there I'm also feeling that.
Right. Absolutely.
So call that out. And we talked a little bit about how adoptive parents can be helpful to a birth mom during her healing journey, which can be a lifetime. But we talked a little bit about how sometimes we should reach out and say, hey, I'm thinking of you, or is this difficult for you, or, what feels comfortable for you? But what are some ways that you think we can be helpful?
I mean, certainly, obviously, keeping up with your promises. But if you sense that the relationship is going well and you can open that up a little bit more, go for it. As long as everyone is comfortable and communication is going well and boundaries aren't being crossed, again, you don't have to stick to what you originally agreed on. Have those communication and be open to different avenues of contact, whether that's visits or FaceTimes or letters or whatever it might be. But again, meeting the moms with resistance and pulling back because maybe they're a little bit emotional. They're going to be emotional. That's just part of it. And so don't be afraid of their grief. Don't be afraid of their outward expressions of love for their child, because I know for me and many other birth parents, we feel like we have to contain that love, because if we show too much of it, they're gonna be like, whoa, like, this is weird. Why do you love your child? And so again, get used to these emotions, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Just because you might feel tense or uncomfortable about a situation doesn't mean it's wrong. I think a lot of times adoptive families and just people in general, when we feel kind of weird about a situation, our automatic response is to stop it completely and get away from it totally. And there's going to be things that might trigger you, but that doesn't mean that it's wrong. It might just mean that there's an area in your life that you need to address. And so really, truly consider, why am I considering pulling back? Or why does this make me feel uncomfortable? Is it really because it's going to affect my child? Or is it really just because maybe I have some insecurities that I need to address? So being critical about your own journey, what led you to adoption, and understanding how you may project your own grief onto the adoption relationship is going to help you support the mom. You're certainly not responsible for her healing journey, but there are ways that you can help her move forward and just be a support system for her.
I love that you brought up the fact that we as parents, as adoptive parents, need to be aware of our own triggers and our own healing that we need to do. And that will come out most likely if you haven't dealt with it, especially while adopting or after adoption, especially if you've gone through any trauma. Seek out an adoption competent therapist. Have that therapist in your back pocket when you start your journey, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you're going to need to pull out that card and call the number.
Right.
So be aware of that as well. How do you address internalized stigma among birth moms and encourage them to embrace and share their stories?
Getting plugged in, but you've got to be ready for it. I was not ready for it. Again, I was very fortunate to have a pregnancy counselor and other people who tried their best to get me plugged in. I ignored all the times my pregnancy counselor tried to get me to go to a support group and do these other things that included other birth moms. And I might have met other birth moms when I was speaking on panels and things like that, but I never invested in that relationship. It actually wasn't until my pregnancy counselor texted me about a Brave Love dinner. And if the listeners are unfamiliar with Brave Love, it's a post-adoption organization, and they host dinners for birth mothers around the nation in various locations. And this was years ago, and they happened to be hosting a dinner in the city I went to college in. And so she was like, hey, will you at least go to this? It's, not a support group. It's just a dinner for birth moms. And I was like, all right, you know what? I'll make a trip out of it. I'll go see some friends. I'll visit my sister while I'm there. And I walked in kind of just expecting to go in and out and get on with my life. And that night changed my life forever. There were about 20 women there. They don't do them that large anymore. And everyone was just really confident and cool about their adoption story. Like I had mentioned earlier, there was a lot of secrecy and a lot of shame around my pregnancy and my placement. So not a lot of people knew, which is also what kind of prevented me from seeking support. I wasn't talking about it much. And these ladies were just cool. I don't know. They had this air to them that I just realized was really lacking in my own life and in my own story. And I wanted what they had. And I didn't realize how much it was lacking in my own story until I was around them. and I'm writing down notes. I'm listening to everything that they're saying about different resources and groups and books and all of this information that I had no clue even existed. And like I had been living under a rock for the last 7 years. And so I went home that evening and I just dove headfirst and spent hours researching and reading and joining and anything I could get my hands on. And I thought at some point I would start to slow down and plateau a little bit, but I just have gotten deeper and deeper, and I'm internally grateful for it, because I walked into that dinner one version of myself and I left that dinner a completely different version, all because I sat around a table with other birth mothers in a very casual setting, connecting with them, not just because we were birth mothers. And so again, the heaviness of support groups, I think, was intimidating for me. A lot of women associate support groups with like recovery programs and things like that. So if that is intimidating to you, find other ways to connect with birth mothers that maybe are in a different setting, something that's a little bit more casual, because there is longevity in those relationships as well. When we're bonding with other people, other community members over things outside of our shared title. So look for those opportunities and don't be afraid. And you might not think you need it, but you probably need it a little bit more than you think you do.
How long ago was that for you?
That would be, what was that? 8 years ago, I would say.
Okay, so not too far into your post-placement journey.
Yeah, well, 7 years. I had been doing things like I had said, and involved in other things, but it was a lot more education for adoptive parents. There was not a lot of emphasis on any sort of community support in my life. And so, but that's really what changed. That was my first aha moment, is what I call it, was going to that, or actually that was my second aha moment. But yeah, going to that dinner was what really changed the trajectory of my life.
I love that. You have an amazing IG account that I know you're just growing. You're just starting to grow. And that's what drew me to you. That's what I found. It's called, it's at It Takes a Triad. Go follow. When I was digging deep into your IG, you had posted something about double standards in adoption. Can you address some of those?
Yeah. So I think this is probably pretty obvious for a lot of people, but, some of these double standards in adoption, it just depends on who you're talking to. But for birth parents, like I was telling earlier, we have to kind of subdue our love. We're not allowed to express too much love for our child, yet the adoptive family is allowed to express all the love for the child. But the moment that we express maybe too much, that's when we may be judged or the relationship might be threatened. And no child has ever suffered from too much love. And again, if you are stifling that, it's going to cause women to maybe get stuck in their grief as well. A colleague, very close colleague of mine, we're actually talking about double standards recently, and she's amazing, fantastic, Mirlin, a transracial adoptee, and she was saying how growing up, her siblings, like she was expected to be on like her best behavior all of the time, more so than her siblings who were biological siblings to her parents. And so that double standard, these expectations that, oh, you have wonderful adoptive parents, so you have to be perfect, while her biological siblings didn't have that same standard. That was one thing that was interesting to me when we were discussing this. But of course, for adoptive families, we say this all the time. And if you've not heard this, if you're a listener and haven't heard this, an adopted child will never fill the void of a biological child. Even if you adopt, you're still going to battle infertility if that's part of your story. And so you've got to accept that this child, you're going to have to parent this child differently because their emotional needs are different than a biological child. And so you've got to understand that an adopted child will never replace a biological child. Yet the same is not said for adopted children. they innately know that their adoptive family does not replace their biological family, but they're not allowed to express that. They're not allowed to talk about that, not allowed to discuss or feel that loss. Whereas the adoptive parents are allowed and almost praised for recognizing the difference. So, there's lots of different double standards within adoption. I think if we sat down and picked them apart, come up with a long list. But there's got to be equity within the relationship to kind of overcome these. And it does come down to the power dynamics and things like that. And so being aware of what position and the power that you do hold is going to help prevent you from kind of perpetuating some of these double standards in adoption.
Yeah. Thought-provoking for sure. And while it's, of course, this, you don't think about it, right? You don't think about it too often. So I love the fact that you called those out, and it gets you thinking. Mm-hmm. What are you most proud of in your role as an adoption professional?
I'm just really, really proud of all the things that I had to overcome and the things that I had to do and the people in my life that had to overcome things in order to even get me to where I am. I wake up every day. I love my job. I love serving this community. It's, if any of my friends or family members that know me, adoption is 75% of my conversations. A lot of my friends are a lot of my guinea pigs and know a lot about adoption that they didn't ask for, but a lot had to happen for me to even be here. My support system had to be established and ready for me to be here, because if I received any hesitation or pushback from people that I loved and people that loved me, it would be a lot harder for me to even have this conversation with you. And that goes for my child's adoptive families. If they were hesitant, or if I had sensed any sort of disapproval of my advocacy and my involvement even early on, that would have deterred me from pursuing more. And so I've just been very fortunate to have people who have really rooted for me throughout this journey. And that doesn't mean that it's been perfect. I have certainly had pushback from people, and people have challenged me and told me that I'm wrong or I'm doing it incorrectly. And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, because I have not felt this great in years. So I'm doing something right here. And as you go, you get better at your delivery and you process more things. And so I'm sure as I first started this, it might have been jarring to some people, because all of a sudden I'm being a little bit more vocal about my experience when it was a secret originally, and, processing things and maybe forcing them to process things that they weren't ready to process yet. And so, it was a little challenging at first to kind of push forward, but that is probably what I would be most proud of. I mean, there's a lot of things that I've done that are really cool and I'm really proud of, but just being here, a lot had to happen. And I think people need to remember that if you come across an adoptee or a birth parent in this space, just know it took a lot for them to speak up and to find their voice. And there have been years of them thinking about these things, and they take this seriously. We're not here necessarily to just make some friends, right? This is our life. We can't turn it off. We can never escape from this. And so if someone is putting themselves out there and getting involved in this way, listen to them, because a lot has had to occur for them to even get there.
That's so beautiful. And I feel so blessed to have had this conversation with you. So thank you. Can we talk about your shirt for a minute? If you're not watching on YouTube, I'm here for it. I mean, it's got French bread and cherries and lobsters and a picnic basket and
sardines.
Cake. Yeah,
cheese.
I love it. Talk about personality. Before I let you go, I have a quick fire round. And the first one is, give a shout out to one person or organization that has influenced your adoption journey or the work you're doing in adoption.
Sure. Well, I will say Kindred. They don't really have an online presence anymore, but Kindred was really, Hannah at Kindred, she really started encouraging me to find my voice first in my writing, and just kind of cultivated that confidence in me. I attribute a lot of my, I guess, success to her, and giving me some opportunities that I don't think I would have had originally. Don't really have an online presence anymore, but that was, really key for me. There's several other people that don't even really have Instagram, but just like my personal contacts, again, like some of the adoptees that are in my life. Lynn, Planting Seeds is her Instagram account. She is amazing, and I love having open discussions with her. Of course, some other more prominent birth mothers in this space, Kelsey Vanderbilt-Reynard and Ashley Mitchell. There's Leah Outen. There's so many other birth moms that are doing fantastic work in this space, and they are just incredible. A lot of those people, just being able to pick their brain about things and support one another and encourage one another along this journey is amazing. There are not many of us in this space who are, outward with our story, and we've got to stick together and we've got to support one another, because no one's going to care about this more than we are. And so we try our best to kind of support one another through this. But goodness, Brave Love, shout out to Brave Love for hosting their dinners. If I hadn't shown up to that dinner however many years ago, I really don't know what my life would look like. It has changed the way I parent my sons, that I have with my husband. My relationships in general are different, all because I showed up to that dinner. I'm telling you, it changed everything about my life. There's, goodness, On Your Feet Foundation, all the education that they provide. I could go on and on. There's so
I
many
didn't say
fantastic.
1 million. I said,
there's so many.
That's awesome. What's one piece of advice you would like to share with adoptive parents or hopeful adoptive parents?
Be intentional in every single way, with your education, with your child, with your own mental health, with the relationship between the adoptive family, with your adoption journey and the research you're doing on an agency, and be critical. Be intentional and be critical, and really pay attention and challenge yourself.
What's one thing you wish every adoptive parent knew before they brought their child home?
That is just the beginning. You're going to need a lot of support. It's never too late to find that support. You might have had a lot of education up until you brought that child home, but that's when the real work begins. And it's okay to not have it all figured out. No parent is perfect, so don't be afraid to start getting plugged in, but never stop being students of your children, and continue learning and continue to take care of yourself.
Describe adoption in 3 words.
3 words. Oh my goodness. An emotional roller coaster.
That's wonderful. That's perfect. Adoption is not just a destination. It's a journey filled with love, resilience, and growth. Wherever you are on this roadmap, trust in your path, stay open to learning, and always lead with your heart. You already have everything you need to create a beautiful story for your family. And when the road takes unexpected detours, I'm here to help you navigate every turn along the adoption roadmap. Thank you for being here. Bye. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. If you did, I have a few favors to ask of you. First, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And while you're at it, I'd love to hear your takeaways. Please write a review and let me know what you liked. And if you have a question or a suggestion on what you'd like to hear, I'd love to hear that too. Please shoot me an email at support@rgadoptionconsulting.com and let me know what you'd like to hear about. And if you have a question, I may just answer it online. Thanks again for listening. Tune in every Wednesday and Friday morning for a brand new episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. Until next time, bye-bye.